Good morning and welcome to Cleveland Park Congregational United Church of Christ. We are an open and affirming congregation. Whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. If you're visiting today, please sign our guest book in the entryway. If you're a member, please wear your name tag. If you're sitting in the sanctuary today, please remember to mute your devices. And if you're joining us on Zoom, please mute yourself on Zoom. Just a couple of announcements this morning. So today, after coffee hour, during coffee hour for this Juneteenth Sunday, Angelic Nelson will introduce us to the topic of restorative genealogy. Also during coffee hour today, as we're doing for all coffee hours in June, the Mission and Social Action Committee is hosting a table for congregation members and friends to sign postcards to the EPA in support of climate-friendly policies. Good morning, welcome to church.
And I believe Emily has an announcement for us as well.
Hi, it's not in the bulletin yet, but on Saturday morning, July 1st, it'll be Cleveland Park Congregation's morning of service at Jubilee Jobs. So for those of you who don't know, Jubilee Jobs has been a long-term partner of ours, and they provide really important assistance to people who are face obstacles, barriers to employment, and do amazing work to help them find jobs. So what happens on the morning of service, you come, have coffee, get a little orientation, and then you work one-on-one with someone. Usually it's maybe writing their resume or filling out an online application, which are like amazingly complicated for jobs that don't have anything to do with computers. So it's really fulfilling because you just spend a morning, like you're done by 12 and you've helped someone get a job. And it's a very small organization, small budget, and they really rely on volunteers to do a lot of this legwork because it's very labor intensive, and that's just what it takes. So anyways, if you're interested, just email me, and I guess it's not in the bulletin yet, but it will be next week, or talk to me at coffee hour after church. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. And for those of you who don't know, Emily is our Mission and Social Action Chair, and she will be at coffee hour. So good morning and welcome to all of you on this beautiful, beautiful June Sunday. It's so good to see everyone. And I'm trying to get back into my computer, which is not, see, this is the first time this has happened, goodness gracious. All right, so you'll just give me a moment and then I'll say welcome and all the other things I want to say. I do have a beautiful sunflower right on my screen, so that's nice. If it would just let me in. Sunflower open, it did, yay. So good morning again. I probably could have winged it, but I've got my script here. Happy Father's Day to all who celebrate, and welcome to our service in celebration of Juneteenth. I'm delighted to welcome Angelic Gigi Nelson as our guest preacher and coffee hour conversation and children's talk leader this morning. She'll be fully introduced, or more fully introduced, at our coffee hour discussion. This morning's worship focuses on the liberation of Black people and the work of white people in that process. We begin by lighting candles of hope and healing for the world. Please join me for our call to worship. Today we remember the end of slavery in our nation. Progress made, the racism that still exists. Today we remember the emancipation of Black lives. We celebrate the gift of freedom, acknowledge the work still to be done. Today we listen to the good news of the gospel. We hear its message of love, commit to practicing it in our lives. And together we pray, God of the Exodus and Underground Railroad, we come to you this morning with open hearts and minds, ready to receive your word. We believe Black lives matter, but participate in systems and structures that devalue and dehumanize these lives. Help us to value the full worth of every human being and respect the dignity of each person in the world. It's not easy to admit culpability, but you call us to truth and forgive us with compassion. In your emancipatory name we pray. Amen. Please rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn, Woke Up This Morning, page 623. I now invite you to join in a time of silent reflection. When we gather for worship, we heed God's call and honor our need for Sabbath and rest. When we enter into silence, we attune our hearts and open our minds to a presence greater than our own. As we begin this short period of meditation, I encourage you to bring your full self to this present moment. Set aside any distractions, lay down your burdens, and take a deep, life-giving breath. God is with us. Let us reflect upon the week that has passed. What are the joys we have celebrated? And what concerns have we endured? Are there things we have done that we ought not to have done? And are there things we have left undone that we ought to have done? As we look forward to the week ahead, what help will we need from God or neighbor? And what can we do to nurture love of God and love of neighbor in the world? We'll close in prayer. Source of life, for the joys we have celebrated, we give you thanks. God of compassion, for the concerns we have endured, please tend our hearts. Spirit of justice, for those things we have misdone, transform us with your love. Companion God, as we look forward to the week ahead, be ever present with us. And great lover of all, as we seek to nurture love of God and neighbor in the world, guide our actions and our prayers. Amen. As I say most weeks in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Now, some of the burdens that we carry are burdens that we really do need to set down. And other burdens that we carry, like our participation in systemic racism and oppression of other peoples, those are burdens that, while I don't believe we should carry them heavily, and I do believe we should carry them together, and I do believe God holds us and supports them in carrying them, are not burdens we should completely set aside. Those are the burdens that inform us. Those are the burdens that motivate us. Those are the burdens that, with God's grace and the support of one another, can inspire us to create change in the world. So this morning, know you are forgiven, no matter what burdens we hold or what burdens we set down. And know that it is in that forgiveness that God gives us the grace to do what we need to do in the world. And now, held in the arms of this God, I invite you to pray together. Great Liberator, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen.
I now invite all those online to unmute and those in the sanctuary to turn and share the peace and love of God with your neighbor in the pew. May peace be with you.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Peace be with you.
Greetings, Kelly.
Hey,
Like,
in a different way, more attentive.
Back again, right?
Okay, so welcome back to your pews. And thank you to those online for having remuted. And I am going to welcome forward Gigi Nelson, who is going to be leading our children's talk this morning. And I invite all children and youth and anybody else who would like to come forward. But this is going to be a participatory children's talk, and I look forward to it, Gigi. Here you go. Do you want me to clip that on for you?
Yes, please.
Right about the right place.
Okay. I'm sorry, unless you could probably put it on your sash. Okay, I think I can manage that. All right, so I've got 3. Give me just 1 second to clip this onto my. And you got your pen for the timer? Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to pass. Well, first of all, my name is Gigi, everyone. Good to meet you. Tell me your names, please.
My name's Stella. My name's Aurora. My name's Magda.
Magda, Stella, and
Aurora.
Aurora. Okay. I'm going to do my best to remember those names, so hopefully that works out. So do you all have a pencil? Okay. Here you go. Just need 2 more, 1 for each for Aurora and.
Oh, I have a pencil.
Okay, perfect. There are. All right, you can grab yours.
It's important to use your own writing utensils, right? Okay, so this is basically just a 1-minute challenge. And all it is, it's a family tree. They have a sheet that looks like this. It's a family tree. And the goal is, within 1 minute, you ladies are going to write down the names of your parents and your grandparents, and if you know them, the names of your great-grandparents. So not first and last names, because that would take a lot of time, and we only have 1 minute, but just the first names. So if their name is, Susan or Jim or whatever, that's the name that you want to write down, okay? So not mom or dad, but actual names, okay? Does anybody have any questions? That make sense, everybody? Okay, and just don't worry if you don't know too many. You never know, they might come back to you, all right? Okay, so on your mark, get set, go. And don't worry if you don't spell it correctly or perfectly, that's okay. Time. All right, ladies, you've got about 25 seconds left. This looks like it might be close. Aurora and Stella are going at it. All right, ladies, time's up. Stop. Okay, so who got the names of their parents? Yeah? Okay, who got the names of their parents and 1 set of grandparents? Yeah? Okay, good, good. So we're still all in the race here. All right, what about both sets of grandparents? Names of both. It looks like we have our winner, ladies and gentlemen. Yay! Congratulations. And so the whole purpose of this exercise is really just to sort of indicate and just show us or illustrate how important it is for our kids to know the names of their relatives, right? And so if you're thinking about your own family or your own children or nieces or nephews, or even your own grandchildren, it's gonna be important that they know who you are and that they can write your name down, right? And maybe even have a story to go along with that name and just say, you know, I remember when grandma used to do X, or she would make these biscuits and I would stuff myself because they were so good, right? And so it's important.
But that's not a personal story, right?
No comment, I plead the fifth. So maybe why I'm on a diet now, right? So anyway, so it's important for our kids to know their family history, and I hope that, you know, as you take today and tomorrow, that you spend some time talking to your kids about these, right? Yes?
Why aren't there uncles and aunts?
Uncles and aunts, because that would be like a whole bigger, much bigger tree, and there are trees like that where you could include aunts and uncles. And so yeah, it's important to talk to them too and to know their names, okay? All right, well, that's the activity. So thank you, ladies, for participating. I appreciate it. And I guess I can dismiss you into Sunday school.
Do you want to do a quick prayer with them?
Or a prayer? Yeah, yeah. Okay. You guys, I see a head shake. Okay. Okay, and you can keep those sheets. You can have it. You can take it home with you.
All right,
okay?
It's yours.
Just hang on to it. All right, thank you. You guys can have a seat if you want.
Trish is now going to share passages from the prophet Micah and Paul's second letter to the Corinthians.
I'll read it from here. Yeah, okay. Today's readings are Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, and 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 17 through 20. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings and with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. Look, new things have come into being. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. So, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we entreat you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Amen.
Thank you, Trish. And this morning, we are going to have a sermon hymn. And so please rise in body and or spirit for I'm going to live so God can use me.
Good morning, Cleveland Park. My name is Angelique. You can call me Gigi. I do love being introduced as angelic because I feel like it gives me something to kind of aspire to. No, really, it's really okay. I'm not universally known on the microphone, and I may or may not have been waiting a long time to say that, so thank you. Okay, but it really is good to be in the house of the Lord with you this morning, so thank you for having me. The last few years have been a succession of events that have opened the floodgates of racial reckoning in this country. You could pick any start date and be justified, but for our purposes, let's just start with 2019, because you really don't want me to be up here all day, because I really could. Okay, but in 2019 was the rollout of the 1619 Project. 2019 was the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery, and there were events coast to coast commemorating that. The project's goal was basically to shift the emphasis of the collective American story to another people who were also in this country from the very beginning and helped create the United States. The 1619 Project reframes what we call Black history and puts it front and center in the American narrative. It's not a reimagining, it's a truth-telling, one that was long overdue. And so suddenly, for the first time on a national scale, the legacy of slavery, along with the documented contributions of Black people to this country, were kind of leading how we experienced American history. And I have to tell you, it felt good. And then that next spring, 2020, we all saw the murder of George Floyd play out on national TV. That tragedy and the many that came before and after galvanized a lot of Americans of every race across the entire country around issues of social justice and police brutality. And then the year after that, 2021, President Biden signed into law a new federal American holiday. And because it is federal, most of us have the day off tomorrow. So as we know, tomorrow is Juneteenth. By now, I'm sure that we all know what Juneteenth celebrates, the anniversary of the order issued by Major General Gordon Granger on June 19th, proclaiming freedom for the enslaved in Texas. So why is that day important? Well, it's not so much the day as the year. You see, that day the Union soldiers into Galveston actually happened in June of 1865. And for you history nerds out there, you'll recall that the Emancipation Proclamation from Abraham Lincoln happened in January of 1863. And that Emancipation Proclamation was what actually was supposed to declare the enslaved in all Confederate states to be free. So let's just sit with that for a moment. What does it mean that Black people in Texas didn't find out until 2 years later? For most Black people, the end of slavery meant the chance to try and reconnect with their families again. Generations of a people who had been separated from both immediate and extended family were trying to reconnect those, put this on so I can actually see what I'm saying, to reconstruct those ties. How easy or hard was that? If I had to guess, I'd say it was probably close to impossible for a lot of people. People had been shipped south, some escaped north, few could read and write. People died, people forgot things. All those elements that are so crucial to an understanding of one's family history weren't always available to the newly freed. So fast forward to today. The Civil Rights Movement, later the premiere of the series Roots on TV, kind of opened up the possibility to many Black Americans that it could be possible to trace one's family history. But where to begin? How to begin? A lot of people got really serious about it, and one by one, many came to the same conclusion. Because you see, it wasn't until 1870 that the federal census included Black people by name. Until then, there were only slave schedules, which often just had the name of the slave owner and then the gender of the enslaved person, and sometimes the age of the enslaved person, but that was it. And so there arose this concept of an 1870s brick wall, the idea that as a Black genealogist, it was pretty unlikely that you could make it to 1870 and then go beyond that point, further back. That's a tough pill to swallow. And if you saw the Washington Post article recently about the history of racism within the National Genealogical Society, well, you can imagine that many libraries and repositories and archives across the country have not been or were not exactly sort of jumping through hoops to help Black people research their family history. The attitude really was kind of, sorry, it kind of sucks for you. But in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, that attitude has shifted. And so now what we realize is that the records are there, just not in the ways we may have been used to. And so now many more places are digitizing information that can help African Americans connect their families. And so we come to this Juneteenth holiday, a day to celebrate family, liberation, freedom, and justice. How do you celebrate a holiday if you suspect that some of your ancestors may have had a hand in perpetuating slavery? How do you celebrate when your people may have benefited from systems of racial injustice? Micah 6:8 tells us that we know what God requires of us: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So what is justice? And for us in 2023, what is social justice? How do we do social justice? Is there more than one way to do social justice? The phrase social justice is not new. It's been around since at least the late 1700s. The concept is even older. It dates from Greek and Roman times. We all know there's really nothing new under the sun, right? So we understand social justice to mean justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. And so in service of that goal, many of us have marched, we've sat, we've attended protests and been smoke bombed or tear gassed. We've written letters to members of Congress, maybe even testified on Capitol Hill. We've sung, we've made posters, we've done it all. It's a pretty broad spectrum, but the one thing that all those activities have in common is that they are also pretty public, right? And maybe that's the point. Social is part of the phrase of social justice, and social does kind of imply public. But earlier this year, I started thinking about sort of untraditional ways that people could participate in the social justice movement. And since I am a genealogist, I started thinking through how genealogy could be another way of doing social justice. I call it restorative genealogy because it really is about restoring families by actually bringing people together, and also just by telling the truth. 2 Corinthians 5:18 and 19 says that God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation with us. I really love the idea that we all have a ministry of reconciliation. I don't know that there's anywhere else in the Bible that gives us a specific ministry and says that we all have it. And if we add that to the requirement to do justice, genealogy really is kind of a perfect fit, if I do say so myself. Reconciliation often does involve making amends with those who have been hurt or wronged in some way. It does require honest dialogue, forgiveness, and sometimes self-sacrifice from the people involved in order to achieve peace and understanding. Reconciliation is essential for building strong relationships and uniting diverse communities. The act of uploading family records, documents, and histories to free public databases like Family Search or GEDmatch, and I'm not being paid by either one, so this is not an advertisement, can have an incalculable, incredible impact on other families and individuals, especially African American, who are attempting to do genealogy. Many of those family stories aren't pretty, and a lot of shame and guilt surrounds them. And so uploading these types of records does take a lot of bravery and some vulnerability. But aren't the rewards worth it if it helps another family to connect to their own history? You are literally restoring families. And in doing that, you are absolutely participating in the social justice movement, just in an unconventional way. And in the same way that God isn't counting our trespasses, thank God, this isn't about blame or shame. Have you ever actually looked at the genealogy stories in the Bible? The lineage of Jesus is not exactly pristine. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if he would have even made it into those fancy, exclusive genealogical societies that were so popular in the 1800s, given some of the people on his family tree. Just saying. And yet the Gospels include his family tree, the good and the kind of shady, as part of the good news of Christ. And I personally think that those genealogies are in there to provide a framework for how we should see our own families. Maybe not everyone was perfect, and that's okay. It's okay to have conflicting feelings towards our relatives and our ancestors. I think too often we feel like we have to present our families, past and present, as these perfect, moral, upright pillars of society, when the reality might be that some of them were just bad people. Every family has them. It is what it is. But maybe instead of trying to bury all that, we acknowledge it. Let the daylight of acknowledgement serve as a disinfectant. Sometimes when we expose things, it loses the power to hurt or shame, especially when none of it was our fault to begin with. And so I encourage you to see genealogy as a tool of social justice. As Christians, we have a real opportunity here to take the lead in doing something as powerful and potentially transformative as just uploading pages of old family Bibles, speaking to older members of our families, and finding out if there have been books or any written records that have been collecting dust in an attic somewhere, and then uploading that information to a public database. I believe that restorative genealogy is a facet of that ministry of reconciliation that the Bible talks about. It's a soft and sort of non-judgmental place to approach hard issues and bring people together in untraditional ways. It's a way to open conversations about systemic racism and state-sponsored discrimination. So as you do your own genealogy or you're thinking about doing your family history, don't flinch. Don't be afraid and feel like you have to cover up the hard parts, those parts where your ancestors' lives intersected with those of Black people through slavery or Jim Crow or any of the other systemic injustices in this country or systems. As you find those records of slave schedules, bills of sale, estate records like wills and inventories, it will be hard to look at and reconcile yourself to those documents. But then you can publish them on those platforms that we mentioned earlier. Because again, it's not about blame or shame or embarrassment or guilt. It really is about reconciliation and restoration, and maybe even in some ways restitution. We all have to play the hand we're dealt, right? We're born into the family we're born into, and no one has to feel bad about that. Because really, it's not like you got the chance to pick your parents, right? I mean, you're just kind of here. So no one is trying to say that the current generation is responsible for the past, because none of us are. But wouldn't it be great if you could make the effort to make things better? It might seem like a really small way to some people, but to Black people especially who are searching for answers, that one act that you do could be monumental. In fact, I think it's one of the greatest gifts of restitution that can be made, making it possible for African Americans to find records and documents online that they would otherwise never have access to, because a lot of times those things do tend to stay hidden in the families, right? When I talk to some white people about genealogy, and this actually just happened on Thursday, sometimes they're really quick to say, oh, well, my ancestors arrived after slavery was over. And that's okay, a lot of people did. But a lot of those same people also married into families for whom slavery was a way of life, or they benefited from moving into areas with racially restrictive covenants or other things. And so maybe in your family there were people who were adamantly opposed to having Black people in their neighborhood. Maybe they even participated in some really unsavory activities. If you have documents that speak to that, those documents could help provide a clearer picture for the Black. Did I just turn this off? Okay. All right. Okay. Right, so I was just saying that if you have documents that speak to those activities that maybe some of your family members did and get themselves involved in, that uploading those documents could provide a clearer picture for the Black families that may have been affected by those actions. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, and maybe as a white person you aren't really sure how you can celebrate it in a way that makes sense to you. Digging into your family history and sharing it online is a way for you to center and also honor the lives and experiences of Black people in your celebrations. And I think that would be really beautiful. I'll close with this from Maya Angelou. Hold those things that tell your history and protect them. During slavery, who was able to read or write or keep anything? The ability to have somebody to tell your story to is so important. It says, I was here. I may be sold tomorrow, but you know that I was here. May we take this Juneteenth as an opportunity to recommit to the values of equality and the dignity of every human person, and our shared responsibility to fight racism within our society and within ourselves. If you can be a person that provides information so that those stories can be told more completely, I really encourage you to do so. God bless you all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelique. And I'm really looking forward to having more conversation with you during coffee hour. I have so many questions. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So let's just take a moment of meditation to reflect on the words of Angelique Gigi Nelson, and then we'll move into our joys and concerns. It is now the time in our service when we share our deep joys and concerns, silently or out loud, with God and with one another. I'll share those we've already received, plus any posted in the chat room, and then invite those in the sanctuary to share. God, hear our healing prayers for Latia as she prepares for surgery this week. Aaron's mother, Aaron is our custodian, Aaron's mother, Patricia, who's in rehab for a blood clot in her leg. Annie's mother, Grace, her niece, Sierra, and the family who love and support them. All friends and family of our congregation who are managing long-term health concerns and diagnoses. God, hear our prayers for Kristen and Dava's family, who's recently come up against transphobia in a real and frightening way. All transgender children and the children of transgender people. The many victims of the refugee boat off the coast of Greece. All friends and family of our congregation who are grieving the loss of loved ones. And anyone, anywhere, who is sick or grieving or in need. Bruce has the microphone. Please raise your hand if you'd like to share a concern.
My concern is for the family of my friend Charles, who had degenerative spinal and neck issues. And he had some surgeries, and they thought he was getting better, and he died on Wednesday from complications. So it's very sad and shocking. So prayers for his family.
I'm so sorry, John. Other concerns? Edmund, and then, Kurt first, maybe, since you're already back there, and then Edmund up front.
Continued prayer for Ukraine.
Thank you. And Edmund.
Our daughter, Julia Nurbin, her mother-in-law passed away recently, Nancy Nurbin, and I would like us to pray for Nancy and her family as they grieve her loss.
Thank you, Edmund. Any other concerns? All right, we'll go to Joyce. God, we give thanks for all parents who support their LGBTQIA children, for Juneteenth, for the memory of Jean Olson and her many years of patient work to make our congregation open and affirming, and for all those who devote their lives to creating peace, joy, and justice in this world. Other joys. I have one from the chat. Sybil says, for Mark and all the other fathers, for all the love and strength they share today on Father's Day and all year round.
I want to thank Darnella Fraser, the 17-year-old high school student who had the gumption and courage to record the approximately 10-minute video of George Floyd pinned under a Minneapolis police officer's knee.
I want to reverse the children's sermon. I'm one of the few old geezers in the church, and I would like to remind people of the importance of genealogy. It goes both directions. We look to and are proud of, or look to find our ancestors. But when you get as old as I am, you have an awful lot of nieces and nephews and children and grandchildren that are the same kind of joy, really, even for the older generation. Let's remember the genealogy works both backwards and forwards, and share the joys of our descendants as well as the joys of our ancestors.
Thank you, John.
Molly and I are celebrating our 57th wedding anniversary today.
Woohoo!
And the musical offering, Fugan vom Himmelhoch, was composed by Molly's mother, Lucy Ollinger Spitzer, for our wedding.
Wonderful.
So I'm so glad the Bible says to make a joyful noise unto the Lord, because so often it's music that brings me to church. And yesterday, a few of us had the most wonderful affirmation of what this church does to support music. 4 of us went to hear Shana Martinez give a concert. Does anybody remember 10 years ago, the young woman who sang with us, Shana? She had a beautiful voice then, and I like to think that our employing her contributed to her evolution. But I'm telling you, the evolution is astonishing. What did you say, Dorothy? She'd be able to sing anything, anywhere, and have the congregation, the audience in tears, so moved by the beauty of her voice. So thank you for your gifts.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. David.
I'm very grateful to have here today my daughter and my son from Brooklyn and Hull, Massachusetts. They're celebrating not particularly Father's Day, but a belated birthday for me. And they brought with them a stove, and so the sweet stove that I have had for 55 years was removed over tons of dirt, and a new one put in this morning by my son. So progress ongoing.
Happy birthday, David, and congratulations on your new stove. Other joys? Oh, Maggie?
I want to give thanks for a really wonderful retreat yesterday. We were here and we were able to think about rest and renewal and what that means for us in this season. We were able to lay outside in the grass and just experience the sun and it was just a beautiful time, and I left feeling very restored. So I'm thankful for that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Emily, I love it when there are lots of joys. And Bruce is getting in his steps.
This is a joy and a concern. Magda's school has had some serious issues for years because the source is the leadership. And if you Google Mundo Verde Washington Post, you'll see some of the parents and students had a demonstration Thursday that got news coverage. So I'm hopeful, maybe false hope, because I said this has been going on for years and years, hopeful for change and grateful for really super organized, energetic parents. And yeah, so hopeful for change and accountability.
I've got one too, Bruce. Back off. My joy today is, and every day, is my sweet purpose of my life, Magdalena, my daughter. But she made me this wonderful shirt. Best dad ever. I don't want to brag. But she also put, what does it say, Emers? On here.
Personality, funny, kind, giving. Oh, personality traits, funny, kind, giving. Yeah.
She didn't call me a genius, but I'm not.
Thank you, John. Wonderful. Let us pray.
Lynn, there's a few more in the chat.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Things got added. Let's see, here we go. All right. Oh, yes. John and Sarah, who also just celebrated their 58th anniversary. That is, mazel tov. That is fantastic. All right. Let us pray. Loving God, listen to the prayers of your people. Comfort and nourish us in both our joys and our concerns, spoken and unspoken, and hold us tenderly as we face the many different experiences that life and being human can bring. Holy and gracious Spirit, we are grateful for your presence as we move into this new week, a time that will bring forth its own sorrows and joys. Remind us to hold one another in love and prayer, reaching out as we are able, to lend a hand, offer support, or share in celebration. We give thanks for the blessing of this congregation in our lives and pray that we might be a blessing to others in return. In your compassionate name, amen. I invite you to hold all of these joys and concerns, and especially the anniversaries, in your heart as we listen to the musical offering.
Just to continue with our joys and following up with what Edmund said, Edmund has kept the music that Molly's mother wrote for their wedding day years ago and asked that we play it today with our instruments for you to remember this joyful occasion. So we present Von Himmelhoch, or From Heaven I Come, for happy anniversary, Molly and Edmund.
much. And thank you to Molly's mom.
And this was essentially her master's thesis, which coincided with our wedding. That's why it happened.
For those of you online, Molly was saying that it sounded better than it has ever sounded as it was originally played on the organ of the First Congregational Church in Toledo, Ohio at their wedding. Is that accurate? Yes. Thank you. So this is the time in our service when we receive the offering in grateful appreciation for the life and work of this beloved community. To support our ongoing work of the church, we ask that you please give, in person, via mail, or online, as you are able. If you're in the sanctuary, welcome to contribute as the offering plate is passed. You can also take out your phone and scan the QR code on the back of your worship bulletin, which will take you to our donate page. If you've already donated, we welcome you to take one of the new offering cards in the pew racks and put it in the plate as a symbol of your giving. Those of you online, the donate link is in the chat room. Thank you, everyone, for all of your gifts of time, talent, and treasure. Hymn, commission, and sung benediction. And before our closing hymn, I just want to say at our time of offering, thank you so much for our guest preacher, for all of our church volunteers, because it really does take a village. And in particular, I want to thank Mark Turner this morning for all of his work with our worship technology, including the fact that he realized when he was in the building last week that those in the back of the church couldn't actually see the screen when it was on the floor over there. And so he says he got help, I hope, and moved it up here to the chancel so everyone could see. Thank you, Mark. Our closing hymn, we are walking in the light of God. We will walk, sing, dance, and pray. We'll leave off the marching just, for time's sake. We'll walk, sing, dance, and pray. The three lines are at the very bottom in small print, but you'll see. I don't think we need a commission after that, so let's just go out walking, singing, dancing, praying, walking, marching in the light of God as we go forth into our week. Please join in our sung benediction.
Partners in crime. As well. She seems like a good criminal partner. Anyway, but thank you. Thank you. You're so welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed Lift Every Voice and Sing at the beginning. That was just wonderful.
That was a good one. I had to look. She wanted me to do something else, and I could not find a good arrangement of it. So I just kind of, I do a lot.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear us?
Hey, Michael, can you hear us? I can text that person.
People are on mute.
Yeah, I think most people are on mute. Let me.
Sure they can. Yeah. They can.
Oh, are you good? You can hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. Oh, we can hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
What?
Let me just finish this.
I can hear you.
A cup of coffee?
Yeah, you want a cup of coffee? They have
Yeah.
chocolate cake too. You want
Whatever
that?
they have.
Yeah, they have chocolate cake and they have apple cake. Which do you want?
Can you put one next to the camera for me?
Stay down. Okay, there we go. Looks like I'm praying. Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Both cakes.
Or step back. It'll follow
Yeah,
you if you step back.
Oh, oh, okay. So if I'm here.
Yeah, and I'm out of the way.
And when we're talking, so she's
So
probably going to
it
want to.
will- Yeah, so within reason, it'll move with you.
Okay.
But, you know, if you're way over there, the person can't see you.
Right.
No, it's been like a week. So each other, he like should go down to Kaiser medical appointment. I'd like to be prepared and understand and make
We always did it we're standing there.
Yeah, that works. That works. Sounds good. Very well.
It reminds me when she had the attack. It reminds me I'm sure she's gone all that stuff.
One way or another. One way or another.
Yeah,
I just am going to invite you, please, to get the rest of your food and drink. Start moving in this direction. If some of you could grab some of the chairs on the chair rack there and put them in as part of the circle or right behind, wonderful. And we are going to start our conversation in 3 minutes. Okay?
This is us here, and so if you'd like everybody to see you, you just come and stand. And however you like that, and it will follow you within reason. Like when I move over here, it'll tend to adjust to
And also, if anyone would like to sign a postcard, they're right here for you. We love your
No. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think
If you want to meet it there, we are.
So friends, before we begin, I just have 2 very quick announcements. One is if anybody would still like to sign a climate postcard, please do. The other is coffee hour in the summer is the best time to host because you don't have to make coffee.
No, we need coffee.
All we do, we put out iced tea. I'm sorry, if you want to make a pot, you can make a pot.
No problem. Just saying. But we put out iced tea and lemonade, and it's already provided. It's in the fridge. All you have to do is put it out. We even have some backup snacks for you to put out. So all you would have to do is maybe bring some fruit or veg or something. It's super easy. But the point is that Fellowship Committee hosted today, and they will not be hosting every Sunday in the summer. So if we want coffee hour, there's a sign-up sheet right there next to the ride cap. In fact, Dawn's going to pass it around. All right, excellent. Okay, so Layla and Dit and Gigi, please.
So thank you very much all for coming this Sunday, and thank you for coming to this discussion, and thank you, Gigi, for leading us in this. My name is Layla Heimlich. I was one of the members of the Racial Justice Audit Committee, and one of the things that we kind of came out of that was that we wanted to continue that conversation. We wanted to be able to continue to have places and spaces and times that we could continue talking about many of the issues that came up. And so we thought that this idea of restorative genealogy is just such a wonderful idea and a wonderful concept. And the only thing I just wanted to say, there is a saying, I believe it's a Mexican saying, that we die 3 times. We die 3 times. We die once when our body dies. We die once the second time when we were put into the ground. And the third time is the last time somebody speaks our name. And the institution of slavery systematically denied many people that opportunity. And so that's why I think this idea of restorative justice, restorative genealogy and restorative justice is so important. And Dit will introduce you.
Thank you. Do you mind if I sit to do that? Is that okay?
You are more than welcome.
Many of the wonderful things that happen in my life come to me via my wife. And our relationship with Gigi is no exception. Susan met Angelique as worshipers at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and they worked together on the Archives Committee. Angelique bringing her discipline as a military historian, Susan bringing her passion and prying skills to discover what archives may exist around Alma Thomas, who was a lifelong member of the church and neighbor of the church. And they became friends and co-workers and have been through trials and tribulations there as well. And so we benefited from having this relationship. And she wrote to me and asked me about this concept and said, do you know if anybody would be interested? And I said, well, I don't know, let me check it out. And I shared it with Ellen and with members of the Racial Justice Audit Committee. Said, oh, heck yes. Oh, yeah. and that discussion led to today. And we invited Gigi to spend a few minutes with us to speak more in detail about the topic and more about some of the practical approaches and techniques. You've heard her approach. So we are delighted to welcome Angelique Nelson, Gigi, we like to call her. The floor is yours. Take it away. Thank you for coming.
Thank you to all of you who decided to stick around for the coffee hour. It's so great to see all of you here. I want to start by just giving you, maybe let me move somewhere.
Just get up and they can see you on the screen. There you are. There, now they can all see you.
Okay, so I wanted to just sort of start by giving you a little bit of background about me so that you know where I'm coming from and sort of where I'm hoping to go. So as Dit mentioned, I was a military historian. Before that, so my degrees are in history, in American history. My father was in the Army, and so I moved around a lot as a kid. And so we ended up my senior year in Georgia. And so I did high school there and all college and stayed, really, really long time there. But I also taught college history for a while. And then I decided I probably should not be a teacher. If I wanted to, anyway. So then I just by the grace of God, I sort of fell into military history. I'd never heard that there were like actual military historian jobs. It really just kind of happened from, looking for jobs. That was my job, was looking for a job, literally like 8-10 hours a day. And so I came across the Air Force historian site, and I thought, could do that, because why not? I could do that. So I applied, and I didn't realize that I was applying to an internship, but as things worked out, it was an internship that turned into a full-time job that turned into 10 years as an Air Force historian. It was a great time. I loved just about everything about it. I even deployed twice. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday that I'm working on this, but it's still sort of really great that, you know, because I was a civilian, I'm not considered active duty, so I don't get any of the benefits that veterans, and God bless our veterans, no doubt, but it would be nice to sort of capital recognition. Anyway, but in that job, they wanted you to stay mobile, like moving every couple years, because I actually came to DC from Italy. I had been stationed there for 3 years, deployed again when I was down there to Abu Dhabi, which is, you know, UAE, right, United Arab Emirates. So that was sort of my experience. I've kind of been, and I forgot to say, I was actually born in Los Angeles. So I've kind of been pretty much a lot of places. Anyway, so I got here and I thought if I could get to DC, then I'll find a job and settle down here in DC. So I did. And during the pandemic, I think like a lot of people, you sort of had time to kind of really figure out what your passions were and where your real interests lie and that kind of thing. And for me, it was always genealogy. And so in that, I decided that I would start a nonprofit called the Majani Project. And Majani is Swahili for leaves. And so the idea is that our children are the leaves on their branch of the family tree. And so in the process of creating this nonprofit and just getting it up and running, and I've never done anything like that before, so it was all a learning experience, super, you know, steep learning curve kind of thing. I went online and I was looking for books to help, because let me back up for a second. The goal of the Majani Project was actually to introduce more African-American kids to genealogy. It's just not really something that many of us, our families, sort of talked about around the dinner table for a lot of different reasons and a lot of valid reasons. But the reality is still that many of us didn't have those conversations growing up. And so the goal of the Majani Project was to change that narrative. And so in the service of that, I was looking online at Amazon and different booksellers to find a book that would speak directly to Black kids. And I couldn't find any. And so actually, to be fair, I found one that was written in 1998. And so I ordered it as fast as I could, and it got to my house, and I was like, wow. Okay. So then I thought, you know what, this is not a setback. This is an opportunity. And so I wrote a book myself and published it myself and called it For the Culture, a genealogy handbook for the cool kids. And it was just a title that I kind of came up with because I liked it. And yeah, so I just want to show it. Okay, thank you. Okay.
There we go.
So yeah, that's kind of how the whole thing started. And then in the process of doing that, this year I was, you know, you try to stay in communication with God, right? That's kind of what we do as Christians, is sort of try to stay in prayer and hear God's will for what he wants us to do. And so it occurred to me that, you know, maybe I could just start talking a little bit more and just sort of expanding that whole idea of genealogy and how it can be useful in terms of social justice and things like that. So really I liked what Layla said about, you know, this coffee hour being a time for conversation, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is just sort of, you know, maybe just having a space somewhere and be like, you know, ask a Black genealogist, right? And so what I really, if you have any questions for me about absolutely anything, I really hope that you feel like this is a safe space to explore those questions that maybe you hadn't, you know, had the nerve to ask anybody, just about genealogy in general, or about the past, or about history. I did major in history. I'm not going to say that I'm the world's greatest historian, because I'm really not, which probably was why I shouldn't be, but anyway. Okay, so, but yeah, I really just kind of wanted this to be a conversation. So if you have any questions, if you want to ask me about the book, it's basically an activity book. So you can't really talk about genealogy without talking about history, right? And so I did kind of start off from that standpoint of Alice Haley and the series of roots, and just kind of bringing it a little bit forward. And I try not to get too, because, you know, as a historian, it's hard to not get, you know, to go all in with the history. But I had to remind myself and pull back that this is a book for, you know, young adults. Not really for, like, young kids, but more like the 10 and up, 10 to 18, and also adults. It's really great for adults, too. And so in the back, there's a section to complete your family history charts. There's sections to like write down recipes, because when it comes to a culture, you're talking about food, you're talking about music, you're talking about dance, language, all those things, religion, all those things that go into making a culture, right? And so there's spaces in the book where you can write down those things in your own family and kind of, keep them for posterity. So having said that, if you have any questions for me, I'm always happy to answer questions. Yes.
I'm curious whether or not you feel that, like DNA, I know that there's a whole kind of new looking at genealogy from the point of view of DNA, and I'm wondering if you feel that that has helped Black genealogy. Do you think that, or do you have much experience with it, or what do you think?
So actually, that's sort of the second part of the nonprofit. In addition to introducing Black youth to genealogy, it's also to start collecting, to get people, to encourage people to take DNA tests. And the reasons for that are sort of multiple, really. The first one really is about the science of it. Because when you're talking about genetic diseases, those samples that scientists and doctors work with right now are primarily European American. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're talking about diseases that are sort of endemic to the African American community, things like sickle cell, then it sort of is incumbent to kind of have more representative samples of DNA from those populations, right? And I was actually listening to a geneticist talk about this a couple months ago at a lecture, a Black geneticist from Howard. And she was saying the exact same thing. So I was like, okay, I'm not wrong. So for that perspective, DNA absolutely is critical. In terms of genealogy, yeah, it's absolutely useful, because there are a lot of different kinds of DNA tests on the market right now. You've got, and they're all pretty much the same. They pretty much do the same kinds of things. I don't know if I should, I'm not going to launch into a whole scientific explanation of the different DNA tests, but I will say that most of them are autosomal, which means they sort of count markers on both sides of your DNA, the spiral, the double helix. So they're autosomal, they count both. The interesting thing about that is because there are also, I should say this, there's also a specific African ancestry DNA test available. And that's a really good point about the whole, and I'll get to that too, because the ethics of DNA tests can be, for some people, they're really unclear. So remind me to make sure I talk about that. So, but in terms of one of the things about the African, and they're actually based here in DC, and I finally got around to taking one, and it purports to tell you, based on your DNA, which tribe in Africa you're actually from. And again, the more representative samples when more people in Africa and America take these tests, that science is, right? And so if your mic is on or if your speaker is on, you might want to turn it off. There you go. Okay, I think that's my sister. That's my so again, the DNA, the science never changes. It's just that as it gets better and as more people take these DNA tests, you have better outcomes. And so that's why if you've ever taken a DNA test and you get an email one day that says, hey, your sample, it's been updated, and you're like, wait, what? Well, that's why. It's because more people, maybe from the region where your family was from, actually took more tests, and so they're able to sort of better narrow down exactly where your family might be located. Now, as far as ethics goes, and there's good reasons to kind of, really be interested in the ethics of DNA. And I am not an ethicist, and I am not a geneticist. So this is sort of from a historian perspective. But I will say that, because if you got anybody who's in this field, or if you've into genealogy as an amateur, you probably know about that whole thing with one of the companies, and honestly, the name right now escapes me because there's a lot. But the one where I think it was the Golden Gate Killer was found using DNA. And so while that outcome is fantastic, because, we all want killers brought to justice, right? But the ethics of how it was done were a little squirrely for a lot of people. And so that company, kind of got into some hot water, because there were issues of, did they have the right to give this information? Were there privacy papers that had been signed and then violated? It was a whole thing. And so now the outcome of that was that a lot of companies now do have things where you either have to opt in, like when you register to take a DNA test, you have to, you're supposed to read through the papers or the documents online and decide whether or not you actually want your information to be publicly available to the police, available to, scientists and doctors. 23andMe is like that, where you have to opt in. Some of them do it the other way, where you have to opt out. And so then it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you read the fine print. And, luckily it's not too fine, you can actually read it. You want to make sure you read it so that you understand what you're consenting to. And so a lot of it is just kind of educating the public on what is available in terms of, the DNA test and where these DNA tests stand. You want to make sure you do your research so that if you do decide to participate in a DNA test, that you're comfortable with what you're consenting to. My own take on that, I was just having this conversation with somebody else a week ago Thursday, and we were talking about DNA, and this was a Black person. And they were saying, well, I don't know, because, I don't want, if I upload my DNA, then, they might be able to find somebody. And I was just like, but if your relative did something that bad, wouldn't you want them back? I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like, so when they looked, he was like, yeah, you're right. And I'm thinking, I know I'm right. But the point is, it's not like they're just going to come. There's a whole process that's involved. Whatever you decide to consent to, there's a whole process involved. It's not like you I don't think you should worry that you're setting people up to get, nabbed by the cops. If they've done something that warrants that, that's something they have to work out, right? So, but in terms of uploading DNA, I really can't stress how important I think it is, just from a health scientific standpoint, and then also from a genealogical standpoint. I forgot to tell you. So when I did that African ancestry, and African ancestry is one of the tests where they say that they don't. A little bit. Oh, I've been moving back, and it's like, okay. That's too funny. Okay, so African ancestry is one of those where they don't keep your DNA. Like once they do the test, it's destroyed, and that's the end of it, so nobody has access to it. But so when I did the test and the results came back, it said that I was from the Fulani tribe in Africa, which is basically like Ghana, Senegal, that whole West African coast area, which was great because I had just been to Ghana in November, so that was kind of awesome. But yeah, so I hope that sort of, talking about DNA, if you have any other questions about it or, concerns, yes.
This is not exactly about DNA. Can you tell us about the role that Black churches play in preserving family identity and continuity?
That's a really good question. And I always hear people say that's a really good question. But really, that's really good. Okay, so, you can't, it's incalculable how important the Black church was in African American communities from the very beginning. There's a lot of discussion about the church where it is now, but if you're talking historically, the Black church was the one place in any community where Black people could feel comfortable and go and socialize. So it sort of acted as the community center, the old folks place where, people like the day center, the daycare centers for senior citizens. It was also the church. And then it was also the place where you got your news. So the church had all these functions and they had all these different activities inside of that. So when it comes to family history, if your family was a member, and at that time, most Americans in general were members of churches, and Black people especially too, were really involved in, their churches in white denominations and also, the Black denominations too, right? So, but in the Black denominations, which I think is what your question is really about, yeah, the records of the Black church are just, it's a gold mine. It really is. Because if you're looking to sort of trace your family, I actually have a client right now, I'm tracing his family. His goal was to find evidence, if there's evidence to prove that his family was involved in that Georgetown 272. You guys have heard of that? And in case you haven't heard of it, it's the Georgetown was owned by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits were involved in slavery, and so they sold like 272 slaves to kind of shore up the funding, the financial aspect for Georgetown so that it wouldn't go bankrupt. And even before and after they had been engaging in slavery. So there's that. So present day, Georgetown has said that if they are able to find, okay. Georgetown has said that if you are able to prove that your family was involved as an enslaved, if your enslaved ancestors were, part of the Georgetown plantations in Maryland or DC, that you could, your descendants could go to school for free. And so I have a client now who's trying to see, because his family has deep roots in this part of the, state, country, city. And so he wants to see if there's, evidence that his family were members of Georgetown at some point. So that's one of my clients. So having said that, to get sort of back to your question about the Black church, even when it comes to Black Catholics, right? So you have those Catholic churches. So those records are just gold mines. Absolutely.
Alan, is it okay? I want to piggyback on the Georgetown thing. Is that all right? So, have you seen the book that just came out, the 272, and it's about the Black experience with the Catholic Church? And
I mean, I've bought some, but I'm not sure
it was just published.
Oh, okay.
They did it. It was on Fresh Air, I think, this past week on NPR. I don't know if anybody else heard it, but it was so fascinating because one of their points was the state of Maryland was essentially created as a refuge for Catholics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the Catholics turned around and, basically the Jesuits were supported by the plantations. And, the 272 then made part of that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting history, and again, one of those twists that you're just like, wow, that happened. so yeah.
Sorry, Alan, go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to test this presumption. I know nothing about any of this, except I remember genealogy was always based on your father and your father's father. And my family has a big book, about 500 pages, tracing our family back, but it's always the fathers. So I know in Africa, they have a lot of matriarchal societies. I was wondering if maybe this new DNA testing is a way to cut through that patriarchy, so you can find out who your female relatives were as well as your male.
So yeah, there are DNA tests that will trace just the matrilineal line as well as the patrilineal line, because a very brief primer on how DNA works, right, is that there, for the most part, you get 22 chromosomes, half from your mother and half from your father, and then it's the sex chromosome that comes from the father. So if you're a male, you were born with a Y chromosome. If you're a female, biological female, you're born with 2 X chromosomes, right? So when it comes to the male line, and that is a much more sort of European way of looking at genealogy for sure, and other cultures too. But yes, and there's in African society, there's a lot of the culture is much more matrilineal for sure. And I think the other word I want to use is matrilocal, but anyway. So it is possible to take DNA tests. I think that probably is a short answer to your question, is that it is possible to take, matrilineal DNA tests. Actually, 23andMe also does this, because I've taken their test. They will give you the name, I'm blanking on the name of the haplogroup. That's the word I'm thinking of. Is anybody familiar with that term, haplogroup? It's a super scientific term, and I already said that I'm not a scientist, so if I butcher this definition, forgive me. But it's basically, scientists have sort of grouped areas around the world in terms of like populations, and so they group those DNA samples into like certain numbers, a combination of letters and numbers. And so 23andMe will tell you what your matrilineal, what that haplogroup number is. And so when you have that, I haven't done this yet because I'm still, working through a bunch of other stuff, but you could actually use that to start, sort of tracing and going further back. And that's a number that's not going to change. We talked about how the representative numbers in terms of I'm 17% this, or, Irish, and 20%, from Senegal. That number, your haplogroup number, is never going to change, because that information is passed down through your mother's side only. And so you get that from, and I hope I'll just leave that out. Anyway, because I don't want to end up saying something that's like way wrong. And there's so much information that's not hard to do. So, but yeah, so to answer your question, yes, that is possible. Yes.
Are all of the databases and DNA sites, are there some that you recommend over others? Are they all created equal? Do they communicate with each other? Am I missing data if I choose one?
That is nothing. Short answer, kind of. So the great thing though, and I'm actually really glad you brought that up because there are other sites. There's a site called GEDmatch. And the great thing about GEDmatch is that no matter which DNA test you take, you can upload the raw data to GEDmatch, and whoever else has input their raw data, whether the test is 23andMe, Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, or the 12 other kinds that are out there, GEDmatch will look for your DNA matches. And so that's one place that I know of that you could actually get more information, an aggregate, amount of information, as opposed to if you uploaded if you take 23andMe and you only upload to 23andMe, you're only going to have access to that database of people who've also taken 23andMe tests. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
GEDmatch does sort of a search through all of them.
Yes, yes. Now, the only thing about GEDmatch, which, I like to talk about it, and again, I'm not being paid by them, so. But I like to talk about them because the more people who upload to GEDmatch, regardless of what test they take, then again, the greater that representative sample is going to be, and then the greater chance you have of matching DNA from people who may have taken other tests. Yes.
Are there efforts to upload these archives of these Black churches? Because it seems that could be an important source of information. Many of them are very old.
Yeah.
They go way back.
Yes. Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. The National Museum of African and American History and Culture here in DC is in the process of helping Black churches do exactly that, like sort of digitize and do the collection and kind of sort through and see what's what. And then some of those collections are going to the museum, and then some might be staying in-house at that particular church. Of course, the great thing though is that they are being digitized, so they're more available to more people, right? And even not just the museum, but also different denominations are also sort of looking at the Black churches within their denominations and saying, hey, maybe we can, partner with you to, digitize these collections and kind of, put them in a central repository so that they're more available to more people. So there is definitely a move to do that. Yes.
So, when you talk about restorative genealogy, it's really interesting. And my family has a story. My grandfather was born in 1896. He was a reporter, a newspaper man, as he called himself. Climbed the fire escape so that he could spy on the Ku Klux Klan meeting, report the names in the paper the next day with no byline. That's always something where, as the person from my background, you check the box and say, look, we're on the good side. But I'm from Indiana, on both sides of the family. The birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. So my question is there any database of Klan members? Is anybody sort of like, you want to do restorative genealogy, you better find out how involved your family was in the Klan. Have you ever encountered anything like that?
I had not.
I'm guessing because most people would say, I don't want to go anywhere near that.
That's kind of one of those things. It's like, let me just stay as far away from that as possible, right? For a number of reasons. But yeah, that history is super important. So are you talking about like databases that have been created by ex-Klansmen or just people who've done the research and sort of come up with names?
People who've done the research. I mean, Klansmen, I suppose, would have not been looking for to publicize who they were.
Yeah, no, I haven't. But to be fair, I've never actually thought about that. So that might be a question I might have to circle back with you.
I can give you a comment on that. There was and I'll have to look up the name, but I will, a minister in Tennessee who considered his ministry to Klan members, and there's a book about him, and I'll go find what that is for you. The other source you might look at is a series of hearings that the House of Representatives did against and I think it was maybe even the UAC committee. It was one of those committees did an exhaustive investigation of the Klan around, and there's tons of data in that. And I actually have some of those records if you're interested.
That'd be great. Gigi, I want to say thanks just because I never would have thought of looking there if you hadn't come and spoken to our church today. This sort of opens up a new way of thinking.
Thank you. I was also thinking possibly the Southern Poverty Law Center. They are an incredible source of information we just don't know and probably don't want to know. But, yeah.
I'm curious, I know that a lot of Black families have white ancestors because of sexual violence. And so I'm curious how, when white people are doing genealogy, how that can actually be helpful to, also traumatizing, I know, to Black people who are trying to trace their ancestry.
So it's one of those things, I think, obviously you sort of want to approach it with some sensitivity, right? But and be careful that you're doing your best, like not to sort of re-traumatize, right? Yeah. And so I think it would be different for probably every individual case. But in just sort of overall umbrella terms, I think that especially if you have like concrete proof that it actually was a case of sexual violence, like, they just wrote it like, we don't even care, like, this is what happened, it was what it was. Then if even in uploading that, you could always do like, maybe just a little bit of a disclaimer, like this is what this is. So, these are the families involved, and just sort of, maybe make it easier, make it a little bit more, just easier to digest, right? There are no easy answers. The subject of race in this country is really difficult. We've seen that because it really has never been addressed. It's starting to be, but I mean, it's 2023, right? So it's a difficult subject, and it's hard to sort of wrap your mind around how the best way is to approach anything when it comes to race and just how we interact with people. But I think the great thing is that as Christians, we don't have to be afraid of that, right? Because God's not given us a spirit of fear, right? So if you find information and you're trying to figure out, the best way to maybe present it or, publish it or whatever, you can always give me a call. There's always people who, or any museum or, anybody or, in that field that can kind of help you maybe navigate that.
And one other point to add to that, there are lots of unions that were not, there were lots that were born out of that kind of violence, but there were some that were not. There were some that were organic, and those plenty of those exist, including in my family. So
for sure, and I would add to that, and then there's a lot. So you have, the romance part, and then you have the violence part, and then you have a giant area in the middle of a whole lot of gray where maybe it was consensual, maybe there was pay. I mean, there are so many possibilities of how these things happen. So I'm not sure that, let me put it this way, if you know for a fact that that's what it was, then it matters. But if you don't know, you don't always necessarily have to assume the worst. You could just look at it like, this was there, this is what happened, and then just sort of present it like, this is what happened, this is what I know about what happened. Yes.
Do you have any examples of where descendants of white families, descendants of Black families who have mixed, have met and discussed it in the 21st century?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. So there was a really, really great article, what is it, June? Maybe a couple months ago. I forget which paper it was in, but the article talked about the Carter G. Woodson family. And I don't know if you remember that, if you caught that story, but it was talking about how the Black Woodsons ended up meeting the white Woodsons, and just sort of going through the histories of both families and how they ended up meeting, I guess a couple, maybe 10 years ago, somewhere in the past 10 years. So I think if I remember correctly, it started with, I want to say his name was Greg, I think, Greg Woodson. He was on the white Woodson family side, and he was a professor in California of ethnohistory or something like that. And he just, I don't know exactly what made him be interested in looking at this, but something sparked him. I blank on what it is right now. And so he just started doing the research, doing the genealogy. And I think at one point someone had said, that's what it was. Someone said, you might be related to Carter G. Woodson. And he was like, what, who, And so then he was like, he realized that the family came from the same place. That's always a good clue, right? When the families all come from the same place. And so he started doing the work and doing the genealogy and tracing them. And then once he traced the past, he started tracing descendants. And so he tracked down the descendants of Carter G. Woodson. I don't remember if he had kids, but I think they were maybe like his nieces and nephews and their children, right? So he called him up, explained who he was. He said there was like a lot of suspicion, like, who are you and what do you want, kind of thing. But then they ended up meeting, and over time they developed a relationship. And he said, you know, it hasn't always been like super easy. There were times when, you know, one side got mad at the other for, you know, whatever. But I mean, isn't that what families do? Right? We get mad and then we don't talk and then we reconcile and, you know, we make it okay. That's family, right? And so he ended up helping the youngest. I think this boy is about to graduate. Either he graduated last year, he's about to. And so, you know, he sort of set aside some funds to help him with, I forget what college he's going to, might be UCLA. So yeah, so there are those stories, and I will tell you, the ones that I have read, they, you know, they're not easy. They're not easy in the sense like, oh, this is just so great, you know? I mean, it is great, but it's also hard, right? And so you have to kind of understand that if you choose to do that kind of research, that it may not always be easy, but again, it's not something that you should be afraid of, right? And I'll tell you just one more story about another person that I actually know who did this work. So this was a girl, I had gone to her, she has a book out, and I went to the book signing because I was like, oh, we're in similar fields. I want to hear what she's got to say. So I went, and she actually had gotten it, you know, decided to do her genealogy, and she traced her family, and she found out she had a cousin who was actually, I think I want to say Emory, on the white side of the family. And so she said that before she left to go meet with him, that her mother had told her, you know, make sure he understands that we are, she didn't use the word middle class, but like, we're not asking for anything. Because I think that is a big part of it, is that, you know, there are some people, white people have this fear like, oh, if we research and find the descendants of our black side of the family, they're going to be asking for all this stuff. And so her mother wanted her to make sure that she told this man, like, we're good. You know what I mean? And I think, honestly, that's the reaction that you'll find from most black people. Most black people are not asking for anything except for information. That's literally it, just information. You know, if you feel like, you know, that you want to do more, that's a conversation you have with them and you sort of figure that out. But don't let the fear of what might happen or what might not happen keep you from really, you know, exploring.
Oh, excuse us, we have to leave.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We have a Father's Day. Happy Father's Day.
Sorry, guys. No, you're good.
Edmund, go ahead.
Edmund, you want to ask your question?
Well, we have our oldest daughter is, has become progressive in a way that, to an extent, that's kind of surprising for her parents. And she's quite interested in our family being more woke about our Southern roots. And so on her sabbatical, she took a trip down through the Shenandoah Valley out to Tennessee and then to Texas to trace roots that finally wound up in Texas. And I think she found out that my great-great-great-grandfather had a 10-acre plantation outside of Nashville where he had 6 slaves. So that I have a slave-owning relative back there somewhere, and that was not what I wanted to hear. And then his second son wound up in Texas and was a friend of Sam Houston's and was the first warden of the prison of Huntsville. And so the question is, you know, who the hell were these guys and what were they like? And especially with the Tennessee guy, do I have African American cousins? And so how do you find that out? How would you react to that kind of question?
It wouldn't make
Who
me
the hell were
think.
these?
I think the reality is that if you did have family ancestors who, you know, were involved in slavery in any facet, whether they owned the plantation, whether they were overseers on the plantation, there's a really, really good chance that there was, you know, miscegenation, to use the legal term for it, right? So you just sort of go in expecting that. So I always go in expecting that. Like if it didn't happen, I'd be surprised because people are people. So, and you know what I mean. So you go in sort of expecting that, and then if you find it to be true, like I said, it's not the easiest work, and looking at records that could be, that especially sort of maybe paint your family in not the best light, it's not great, but I think you just sort of have to reframe how you're looking at it and reframe that perspective, right? So that you're looking at it like, it's not great for me, but this could be really helpful to somebody else, right? And so I don't know if I really answered your question. So tell me.
I'm starting from the assumption that knowing the nice parts and knowing the parts you'd rather not hear about, but knowing the whole story is necessary to having some kind of comfort in your identity, because you need to deal with it. You need to deal with how you need to have some ability to deal with your roots.
You do. Absolutely. And when you were talking, it just made me think, like, even as an African American, I mean, that's how I identify. And then when I took the DNA test, not only was there a significant amount of European ancestry, I'm also 3% Jewish. And nobody saw that. It's kind of like those are the things that you find out when you do DNA tests. They might be a little more shocking than you thought they were going to be. So, and even, in terms of sort of reconciling all those different parts of your family as a person, and there's been studies that say that most African Americans have it between like 15 and 25% of European ancestry anyway. So I guess, we've always sort of had to contend with that. But it's still, if you ever watched an episode of Finding Your Roots,
we watch.
Right, and you've seen how people sort of, when they're told that they're 25% Scottish or whatever, and how they react to that, because it's still something that you sort of have to, when you hear it, you kind of have to just sort of sit with that for a moment, right, and just kind of sit with it and kind of work through it, whatever that process might be. And it's going to be different for everybody, I think, because it is hard to kind of reconcile all those pieces of your family. And you're, in a case like yours, where you're pretty sure you might have African American cousins out there, you probably do.
Maybe you want to share the fact that we might be cousins.
Right. You have to. Okay, let me see if I can remember. So, I know I told you that. Plot twist. So, and I'm blanking on the.
Well, you wrote to a relative in Louisiana.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's what happens when you get old. You just forget. Okay, so I'm working through my genealogy, and I came across a name on, I think it was 23andMe on the DNA test site, and her name was like, her last name was Tally. And I was like, oh my God, like she was from the same kind of area from where Dit's from. And so, like I said, proximity is usually a pretty big clue, right? So I wrote to Dit and I'm like, guess what? So that's something I'm still looking into, but it's entirely possible because it's a small world.
So you would start out by going to Nashville and finding out if there are any African Americans named Bowen, which is the name of my great.
You don't even have to go to Nashville right away. A lot of it can be done online. Thank God for the internet. It has made research so much easier. I mean, there's still a lot of records.
You would look at records.
For sure. And at some point you would have to make that trip to Nashville, because as much as there is online, not everything is online. And so if you're talking about some tiny little courthouse, dusty courthouse in the middle of nowhere, good bet those records are not digitized. And so you may have to, make the trip out to, to look at the court records, because that's where a lot of this information is going to be, in the court records, whether they're land records, wills, things that were filed by county and city governments. That's where you find a lot of this stuff.
So are there sales records and that kind of thing?
Those are the kinds of records that are generally held by the family, depending on what it was. If it was part of an inventory that was legally filed with the county, then it may end up in that packet. So you might actually be able to find it there. But sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. We all know records were sort of kept however they were kept on any given day, right? So it's just, it's the luck of the draw what you end up being able to find either online or even in a courthouse, which is why it's so important that if you have those family records at, in an attic somewhere, that you really do seriously consider digitizing and uploading.
We have about 5 more minutes, so I want to make sure any questions like Mark's get answered, and also want to make sure if there is more that you would like to share with us, you have an opportunity to share.
Or if there's anybody online,
Yes.
put it in the chat.
Any of the online people.
Black cemeteries.
Yes.
Is there an effort to try to preserve
Yes.
those? Because these where I grew up, they were disappearing because families were moving away and not taking care.
Yeah, and so, that's another sort of way, if you're looking at sort of systemic injustice in this country, is just how Black cemeteries were financed, how they were created in the first place. And so, you're sort of, it's coming from a situation where it's not like the people who maintain that cemetery had a lot of money to start with. And so as you pointed out, when people move away and then the cemeteries end up neglected, and then there's, the city might turn a blind eye for years and years and years. But yes, to your question, there's absolutely a push. There are major organizations now, nonprofits dedicated to not necessarily restoring, but at least cleaning up and digitizing the headstones so that people who can't make the trip to the original cemetery can at least find that information online. And that's happening in cemeteries all over, but especially in older, neglected. And here in DC, I don't know if you're familiar with Zion, and there's like 5 other. It's like Zion United something or other, but I always just remember the Zion part. But they are one, and there's also Woodlawn. If you've heard of Woodlawn, that's a cemetery where they do regular cleanups now to try and sort of restore the information, those headstones, so that people can kind of get that information and upload it.
And there's Find a Grave.
Funding,
Find a Grave.
Oh, yes,
For
Find a
putting
Grave.
them
Oh,
on.
so I thought you said
No, funding is
Yeah.
a whole different,
Yeah, so there are sites, Find a Grave, Billions of Graves. There's a couple of different free sites where if that's your thing, like and I hope it is, to sort of, if you have time, to volunteer with cemeteries and, do some of the work of collecting that information. All you have to do is take your phone, take a picture of the grave site, the headstone, and then upload it to a site like Find a Grave or Billions of Graves. It's a free site, so it's not going to cost you anything except a little bit of time out of your day on a Saturday. And that's super helpful.
Sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, the book looks really interesting, and I want to buy one. I think you brought a couple of copies. And then I'm going to donate it to our racial justice library, so if anyone wants to read it, or
I said great minds think alike. I was like, thank you. I'm glad.
But thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I just have one more. I'll leave you guys with this thought. There is a fantastic book that was written by a woman named Maud Newsom, and it's called Ancestor Trouble. She's a white woman in New York, and she traced her family roots, and she's very real. It's very raw, and just the emotions that brought up. It was one of those where my family didn't have anything to do with slavery because we were too poor, kind of thing. And then when she sort of started digging a little bit further back, turns out that wasn't actually the case. So if you're interested, it's called Ancestor Trouble by Maud Newsom. It's a fantastic book. I think as a white person exploring that history, she approaches it in a really sensitive way. So I think if you're interested in something you like.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well done.
So Angelique, it looks like you have maybe 3 copies of the book. So if anybody does want to purchase one, they can just.
Yes, I have some more. I just didn't bring them all.
Okay, got it. Okay. So if anybody would like to purchase the book, and how much are they?
So they're $20, cash, Venmo, Cash App,
Awesome.
check,
Thank you.
Whatever your form of payment is.
Michael, did you have something to say? Put it in the chat. We missed it. Or you're going to text me. There. I think I'm on my phone.
Fine, I guess, you know, at our age, it's always difficult to know how you want to answer that question. So how-
Yeah, UTA and Church Tech, I think. Wait, what, Michael?
I just said hi.
Oh, Mom thought that you had some comment.
Oh, I did, but I deleted it. Well, I was Layla. It was sort of that. It was that question about the issue of the concern about creating, even in any community, sort of established families versus non-established families.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Do we want to do? Hi, Mom. Do we want to do our post-church chat now, or should we wait?
What? He's asking if we want to do our post-church chat. We're doing it now, I think.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Have a good afternoon.
So Nancy, if you're right here, right? Yes, you know what?
Just a quick question, have you done anything with the African government?
I was, I actually went to.
Is there one left?
Because they do have, I was wondering, do they do any work with helping people like you?
I think they're in the process, I think a lot of them sort of,
You need to educate them.
but yeah, and there's that. So we're actually in the process of setting up sort of a vagina project in Africa. So, we're working on.
Mark, do we know how to turn this off?
Oh, yeah. It's all problem.
Yeah, you just log out. Looks like everybody's logged off already. So you just hit the back button here, if you ever want to do it. And then that brings up that little navigation bar. And then you scroll over to end.